The blood-red sunset painted the plains of Council Bluffs, Iowa, as Katherine Lawson stood frozen at the freshly dug grave, her tears falling faster than the dirt being shoveled onto her father's pine coffin. The year was 1878, and at 22, Katherine had just lost the last of her family to the consumption that had ravaged their small homestead over the harsh winter months. "Pa, please," she whispered, her voice breaking as her knees finally gave way beneath her. The mourners had long since departed, leaving her alone with her grief as the gravedigger finished his somber task. Katherine's black mourning dress spread around her on the ground as her shoulders shook with unrestrained sobs. She didn't notice the approaching footsteps, didn't hear the soft crunch of boots on the dry earth until a shadow fell across her. Looking up through tear-blurred vision, she saw a tall figure silhouetted against the dying light. Yates Quinn removed his hat, holding it respectfully against his chest as he knelt beside the grieving woman. His weathered face, tanned from years under the western sun, showed nothing but gentle concern. Though not yet 30, his eyes carried the wisdom of a man who had seen his share of hardship on the frontier. "Miss Lawson," he said softly, his voice deep and steady. "The night's coming on, you shouldn't be out here alone." Katherine could barely see him through her tears. "I can't leave him," she managed between sobs. "He's all I had." Without another word, Yates settled beside her on the ground, seemingly unconcerned about the dust on his best trousers, the ones he wore only for church and funerals. For several moments, he simply sat in silence, offering his presence as the only comfort he knew how to give. When her sobs turned to shivers in the cooling evening air, he tentatively placed an arm around her shoulders. She stiffened momentarily before collapsing against him, her grief finding fresh voice against his chest. "Cry as long as you need," he murmured, his hand gently patting her back. "There's no shame in it." Katherine had seen Yates Quinn around town often enough. He managed the livery stable on the edge of Council Bluffs, had a reputation as a fair businessman and skilled horseman. Some called him a cowboy, though he rarely worked cattle these days. He'd ridden with her father on a few occasions, but they hadn't been close friends that she knew of. "Why are you here?" she asked, her voice muffled against his shirt, now damp with her tears. Yates shifted slightly but maintained his comforting hold. "Your pa was a good man, helped me when I first came to town 5 years back. Loaned me the money to buy into the livery when no bank would touch me." He paused, his voice softening further. Said I reminded him of himself as a young man, fresh tears spilled at the mention of her father's kindness. "That sounds like Pa." As darkness settled fully around them, Yates finally spoke again. "Miss Lawson, I need to get you home. The prairie night is no place for grieving." Katherine nodded weakly against his chest before pulling away, embarrassed by her display. "I'm sorry about your shirt." A small smile crossed his face, barely visible in the fading light. "It'll dry." Standing, he offered his hand, helping her to her feet. "My horse is tied at the cemetery gate. I can ride you back to town." The realization struck Katherine suddenly she had no home to return to. The small farm her father had worked was mortgaged to cover his medical expenses. The bank would claim it within days. "I have nowhere to go," she admitted, fresh tears threatening. Yates studied her face in the dim light. "You have no family, no friends to take you in." "None close enough. My mother's sister lives in St. Louis, but we haven't spoken in years." Katherine brushed dirt from her dress with shaking hands. "I'll find work in town. Perhaps Mrs. Guthrie at the boarding house needs help." Yates frowned. "It's late. You need rest before making such decisions." "My sister Olivia lives above the millinery shop. She has a spare room and would welcome the company." He hesitated. "Just until you decide what to do next." Katherine wanted to refuse, to maintain what little dignity she had left, but exhaustion and grief overwhelmed her pride. "I would be grateful," she whispered. They walked in silence to his horse, a sturdy dappled gray gelding that nickered softly as they approached. With gentle hands, Yates helped her mount before swinging up behind her. Katherine sat rigid, uncomfortable with the impropriety of their position, but too drained to protest. "I won't let you fall," he promised, his voice close to her ear as he guided the horse toward town. The streets of Council Bluffs were quiet as they rode, most citizens already retired to their homes for the evening. Oil lamps glowed in windows, and the occasional laughter from the saloon carried on the night air. Katherine felt like a ghost, passing through a world that continued turning while hers had stopped. Olivia Quinn was still awake when they arrived at the small apartment above the millinery shop. A tall woman with the same deep brown eyes as her brother, she took one look at Katherine's tear-stained face and ushered her inside without question. "You poor dear," Olivia said, helping Katherine remove her shawl. "I'll make some tea while Yates brings up your things." "I have nothing with me," Katherine replied, her voice hollow. Brother and sister exchanged a glance before Olivia nodded decisively. "We'll sort that out tomorrow. Tonight you need rest. I have a nightgown that should fit you well enough." Yates cleared his throat. "I'll come by in the morning." "We can retrieve your belongings from your father's place then." After he left, Olivia guided Katherine to a small but clean bedroom, helped her out of her morning dress, and handed her a soft cotton nightgown. "Sleep now," she said kindly. "Things often seem clearer in the morning light." But when morning came, clarity remained elusive for Katherine. She woke disoriented, momentarily forgetting her circumstances until the weight of grief pressed upon her once more. The sounds of Olivia moving about the kitchen drew her from the bed. Finding her black dress brushed clean and laid across a chair, she dressed and ventured out. "Good morning," Olivia greeted, setting a plate of eggs and toast before her. "Yates will be here soon. He's bringing the wagon to help with your things." Katherine picked at the food without appetite. "You're both very kind, but I can't impose nonsense," Olivia interrupted firmly. "It's no imposition. Besides, I could use help in the shop. If you're handy with a needle, perhaps we could arrange something more permanent." Before Katherine could respond, a knock at the door announced Yates's arrival. He entered with his hat in his hands, his expression softening when he saw Katherine at the table. "How are you feeling this morning, Miss Lawson?" he asked. "Katherine," she corrected quietly. "Please call me Katherine, and I'm surviving," he nodded, understanding in his eyes. "That's all any of us can do some days. The wagon's ready whenever you are." The journey to her father's farm was painful. Each familiar landmark along the dusty road brought fresh memories and renewed grief. By the time they reached the small homestead, Katherine's hands were trembling so badly she couldn't unlatch the wagon gate. Yates gently moved her aside. "Let me." The cabin stood silent and forlorn under the morning sun. The vegetable garden her father had planned to plant was still just turned earth. The chicken coop stood empty, the birds sold to pay for medicine that hadn't saved him. Inside, everything remained as they had left it, her father's pipe on the mantel, his boots by the door, waiting for feet that would never fill them again. Katherine moved through the rooms like a sleepwalker, touching objects, struggling to decide what few possessions she could take. "The bank will claim the property," she explained, her voice surprisingly steady. "But my mother's things and my personal belongings are mine to keep." Yates followed respectfully, carrying the items she selected: a quilt her mother had made, a small box of jewelry, books, clothing, and a few cooking implements. When they reached her father's bedroom, however, Katherine froze in the doorway. "I can't," she whispered. Without a word, Yates stepped around her. "What would you like me to bring?" "His Bible," she said, "and the photograph on the dresser, his pocket watch if it's there." As Yates gathered these items, Katherine's composure finally broke. She sank to the floor, tears streaming once more as the finality of her loss struck her anew. Setting down the items, Yates knelt beside her, his strong arms enfolding her trembling form. "Cry as long as you need," he repeated his words from the previous evening. "Some hurts can't be rushed." They stayed that way for what seemed like hours but was likely only minutes, Katherine's grief pouring out while Yates held her steady. When her tears finally subsided, she became acutely aware of his closeness. the gentle strength in his embrace, and pulled away with reddened cheeks. "I'm sorry," she began. "Don't be," he interrupted. "Grief isn't something to apologize for." The return to town was quiet, Katherine lost in thought as Yates guided the wagon through the rutted roads. By unspoken agreement, they stopped by the bank first, where Katherine formally relinquished claim to the farm in exchange for clearing her father's remaining debts. "A fresh start," the bank manager said with false sympathy as he filed the paperwork. "Though I'm sorry for your circumstances, Miss Lawson." Back at Olivia's apartment, Yates helped carry Katherine's belongings inside. "I'll be at the livery if you need anything," he told her as he prepared to leave. "Anything at all." The next week passed in a fog for Katherine. True to her word, Olivia set her to work in the millinery shop, teaching her to trim hats and manage customers. The work was a blessing. It occupied her hands and mind, leaving less time for dwelling on her losses. In the evenings, she often sat with Olivia, sewing or raiding, grateful for the older woman's quiet company. Yates visited regularly, usually in the evenings after closing the livery. He brought small gifts, fresh bread from the bakery, wildflowers gathered along the trail, a ribbon he thought might suit her hair. Each time he stayed a little longer, his conversation drawing Katherine gradually from her shell. 2 weeks after her father's funeral, Katherine found herself smiling at one of Yates's stories about a particularly stubborn mule. The smile caught her by surprise, and guilt immediately followed. "I shouldn't be laughing," she said, her smile fading. "It's too soon." Yates studied her face thoughtfully. "Your father wouldn't want your laughter to die with him, Katherine. Joy doesn't dishonor grief. They can exist together." His words stayed with her long after he left that evening. As she helped Olivia close the shop the following day, Katherine broached the subject that had been weighing on her mind. "I should find my own accommodations," she said. "I've imposed on your kindness too long." Olivia looked up from the account books with a frown. "Don't be ridiculous." "I enjoy having you here, and you've been a tremendous help in the shop." "But no buts," Olivia interrupted. "Unless you're uncomfortable here," Katherine shook her head quickly. "Not at all, you've been like family to me." "Then it's settled." Olivia returned to her bookkeeping before adding casually, "Besides, I think my brother would be quite disappointed if you left." Heat rose to Katherine's cheeks. "Mr. Quinn has been very kind." "Yates," Olivia corrected with a knowing smile. "And yes, he has. More kind than I've seen him be to anyone in a long while." That night, unable to sleep, Katherine stood by her bedroom window, gazing out at the moonlit street. Council Bluffs had never truly felt like home before she and her father had moved there only 3 years earlier after losing their previous farm to drought. Now, unexpectedly, she was finding connections here, putting down tentative roots in soil watered by her tears. The next morning, a commotion in the street drew Katherine to the shop window. A group of riders had galloped into town, their horses lathered and heaving. At their center was a wagon bearing what appeared to be an injured man. "Robbery on the mail coach," a breathless boy announced as he burst into the shop. "Mr. Quinn's been shot." Katherine's heart froze. "Yates?" "No, madam. His friend, Mr. Donovan. They brought him to Doc Wilson's. Mr. Quinn sent me to fetch his sister." Olivia was already reaching for her shawl. "Katherine, can you mind the shop?" "Of course," Katherine replied, though her hands shook as she watched Olivia hurry down the street. The thought that it could have been Yates lying wounded or worse sent a wave of nausea through her that couldn't be explained by mere friendship. The hours dragged as Katherine attended to customers with only half her attention. When the shop door finally opened late in the afternoon to admit Yates, she nearly collapsed with relief. He looked exhausted, his clothing dust-covered, a streak of what looked like dried blood on his sleeve. Without thinking, Katherine rushed to him, her hands reaching to check for injuries. "Are you hurt?" "They said there was shooting." Yates caught her hands in his expression softening. "I'm fine. It's not my blood." He released her when she pulled back, suddenly aware of her forwardness. "Jim Donovan caught a bullet in the shoulder." Doc says he'll recover, but it was a close thing. What happened? Yates sank into a chair, removing his hat and running a hand through his dark hair. Mail coach was carrying bank deposits to Omaha. 3 men tried to rob it about 5 miles out of town. Jim and I were riding that way when we heard the shots. He grimaced. We managed to drive them off, but not before Jim took a bullet. Might have been worse if the sheriff's posse hadn't arrived when they did. You could have been killed, Katherine whispered, the reality of frontier dangers striking her anew. His eyes met hers, something unspoken passing between them. But I wasn't. He stood, replacing his hat. I need to get back to Jim. Olivia's staying at the doctor's to help. I just wanted to let you know we're all right. As he turned to leave, Katherine called after him. Yates. When he looked back, she said simply, "Thank you for coming to tell me." He nodded, a tired smile crossing his face. I didn't want you to worry. After he left, Katherine found herself unable to concentrate on work. The incident had shaken loose feelings she'd been trying to ignore, feelings that complicated her already turbulent emotions. By closing time, she had made a decision. When Olivia returned later that evening, Katherine was waiting with a pot of strong coffee. "How is Mr. Donovan?" she asked, pouring a cup for the exhausted woman. "Resting comfortably," Olivia replied, gratefully accepting the coffee. "The bullet went clean through. Barring infection, he should heal well." She studied Katherine's face. "You look like you have something on your mind." Katherine took a deep breath. "I do. I've been thinking about what happened today, about how quickly life can change." She twisted her hands in her lap. "I can't stay here forever, Olivia. I need to make my own way." "I thought we discussed this, please," Katherine interrupted gently. "Let me finish. You've shown me more kindness than I can ever repay, but I can't continue living on charity. The mercantile is looking for a clerk. The position comes with a room above the store. I've decided to apply." Olivia's expression softened. "Is this really what you want?" "It's what I need," Katherine replied. "To stand on my own feet again, to rebuild my life." "And what about Yates?" The question caught Katherine off guard. "What about him?" Olivia set down her cup with a sigh. "My brother isn't one to show his feelings openly, but I know him better than anyone. He cares for you, Katherine, more than he's cared for anyone since Clara." "Clara," Katherine echoed, something uncomfortable settling in her stomach. "His wife," Olivia explained. "She died in childbirth 6 years ago along with their son. It's why he came west, to escape the memories." Katherine sat in stunned silence. Yates had never mentioned a wife, though now she realized how little she actually knew about his life before Council Bluffs. "I had no idea. He doesn't speak of it," Olivia said, "but losing them nearly destroyed him. It took years for him to find his footing again." She reached across the table to take Katherine's hand. "I'm not telling you this to burden you, but so you understand why he might be cautious with his heart." Sleep eluded Katherine that night, her mind filled with thoughts of Yates, his kindness at the cemetery, his steady presence as she grieved, the way his eyes sometimes lingered on her face when he thought she wasn't looking. And now, learning of his own devastating loss, she understood better the depth behind his simple words. "Cry as long as you need." He had known. He had understood grief in ways no one else in her life could. The following day, Katherine visited the mercantile and secured the clerk position. Mr. Peterson, the owner, was pleased to hire someone who could read, write, and calculate quickly. The room above the store was small but clean, with a separate entrance from the alley. "When can you start?" Mr. Peterson asked. "In 3 days," Katherine replied. "I need to properly thank those who have helped me." That evening, she prepared dinner for Olivia and Yates, a simple meal of chicken stew and fresh bread, but made with care. When Yates arrived, looking more rested than the previous day, his eyes widened at the set table. "What's the occasion?" he asked, hanging his hat on the peg by the door. Katherine's stomach fluttered nervously as she placed the stew on the table. "I wanted to thank you both properly, and I have news." Over dinner, she told them about the position at the mercantile. Olivia, though clearly disappointed, expressed her support. Yates remained unusually quiet, his expression unreadable as he listened. After they finished eating, Olivia conveniently remembered mending she needed to complete for a customer, leaving Katherine and Yates alone in the small sitting room. "You don't approve," Katherine said after a moment of uncomfortable silence. Yates shook his head. "It's not for me to approve or disapprove. You're making your own decisions, as you should. But you're upset," he sighed, running a hand through his hair in a now familiar gesture. "Not upset. Concerned, perhaps. The mercantile is on the busier side of town near the saloons and living alone above the store." "I'll be perfectly safe," Katherine assured him. "The door has a good lock and Mr. Peterson lives next door with his wife." "Of course," Yates said, though his frown remained. He stood, moving to the window to gaze out at the darkening street. "Forgive me, I have no right to question your choices." Katherine joined him at the window, close enough to sense his warmth but not touching. "Olivia told me about Clara," she said softly. Yates stiffened, his profile suddenly sharp in the lamplight. "Did she?" "I'm so sorry, Yates, I can't imagine." "Don't," he interrupted, his voice rough. "Please don't pity me." "It isn't pity," Katherine replied. "It's understanding. You knew what to say to me at the cemetery because you've been there. You felt that kind of loss." His hands gripped the windowsill, knuckles white. "It was different. You lost your father, I lost." "Your future," Katherine finished when he couldn't. "The life you had planned." He turned to her then, his eyes revealing a pain she recognized all too well. "Sometimes I think I'm still there at that grave, unable to move forward." Without thinking, Katherine reached out, placing her hand over his on the windowsill. "But you did move forward. You built a new life here." "Half a life," he corrected quietly. His hand turned beneath hers, their fingers intertwining with cautious intent. "Until recently." The implication in his words made Katherine's breath catch. They stood that way for several heartbeats, connected by touch and shared understanding, before Yates gently withdrew his hand. "I should go," he said. "It's getting late." At the door, he paused. "If you're determined to take the mercantile position, at least let me help you move your things." "I would appreciate that," Katherine replied, her hand still warm from his touch. The next morning, Katherine woke to the sound of raised voices from the street below. Looking out her window, she saw a crowd gathering near the bank. Dressing quickly, she went downstairs to find Olivia already opening the shop door. "What's happening?" Katherine asked. "Bank's been robbed," a passing man informed them. "Same gang that hit the mail coach, most likely, cleaned out the safe sometime in the night." Katherine's thoughts immediately went to Yates. "Is anyone hurt?" "Night watchman's got a nasty bump on his head, but he'll live. Sheriff's forming a posse to go after them." Katherine exchanged a worried glance with Olivia. "Yates will go with them, won't he?" "Most likely," Olivia confirmed. "He takes these things personally after what happened to Jim." Throughout the morning, news trickled in. The posse had departed at dawn, following tracks leading northwest toward the bluffs that gave the town its name. Among the riders were Sheriff Hollister, Deputy Reed, Yates Quinn, and 6 other men, all armed and provisioned for several days of pursuit. By afternoon, Katherine could no longer concentrate on her work. "I'm going to the livery," she told Olivia. "Perhaps they've heard something." The livery stable was being managed in Yates's absence by a grizzled old cowhand named Tobias. "No news yet, Miss Lawson," he told her when she inquired. "But Mr. Quinn knows what he's about, been trailing outlaws since before he settled here." "He has." This was yet another piece of Yates's history unknown to her. Tobias nodded, leaning on a pitchfork. "Worked as a scout for the army for a spell, then did some bounty hunting before buying into this place. Got a knack for tracking that's uncanny." Katherine wandered through the stable, finding herself drawn to Yates's small office at the back. The space was tidy and functional, with a desk, chair, and bookshelf containing ledgers and a few worn novels. On the desk sat a small daguerreotype in a simple frame. Picking it up, Katherine found herself looking at a young woman with a serious expression, her dark hair pulled back severely from a pretty face. "That'd be Mrs. Quinn," Tobias said from the doorway, making Katherine jump. "Clara, shame what happened to her." Katherine carefully replaced the photograph. "Yes, it was. You remind him of her, you know, Tobias continued conversationally. Not in looks Clara was dark as he is, while you're fair, but in spirit, she had that same quiet strength about her. Unsure how to respond, Katherine changed the subject. How dangerous is this posse work? Tobias's weathered face grew serious. These outlaws already shot one man, they won't hesitate to shoot more if cornered, but the sheriff's careful, and Yates is too smart to take foolish risks. Katherine's worry must have shown on her face, for Tobias added kindly, "He'll come back, Miss Lawson. He's got reason to now." 2 days passed with no word from the posse. Katherine moved her belongings to the room above the mercantile with help from Olivia and began her new position as clerk. The work was straightforward, maintaining inventory, assisting customers, and keeping the ledgers. Mr. Peterson was a fair employer, if somewhat stern, and his wife occasionally brought Katherine fresh baked goods from their kitchen next door. Despite the benefits of her new situation, Katherine found herself constantly distracted, her eyes lifting to the store window whenever riders passed, hoping to glimpse Yates among them. Each night, she lay awake in her narrow bed, imagining dangers in the darkness and praying for his safe return. On the 3rd day, as Katherine was arranging a display of canned goods, the shop door burst open. A breathless young boy stood there, hat in hand. "Miss Lawson, Miss Quinn said to fetch you. The posse is returning." Katherine's heart leapt. "Is everyone all right?" "Don't rightly know, madam. Just saw dust from the east road and ran to tell folks." After a quick word with Mr. Peterson, Katherine hurried to the edge of town where a small crowd was already gathering. Olivia stood at the front, her face tense as she scanned the approaching riders. The posse came into view slowly, 8 men on horseback surrounding a wagon. As they drew nearer, Katherine could see 2 figures lying in the wagon bed, and her stomach clenched with fear. Sheriff Hollister led the group, his face grim beneath his dust-covered hat. Behind him rode Deputy Reed, and then Yates, Katherine whispered, relief washing through her as she spotted him. He rode tall in the saddle, apparently unharmed, though his clothing was filthy and his face haggard with exhaustion. As the group reached the edge of town, Olivia rushed forward. "Who's hurt?" "Abe Collins and Micah Foster," the sheriff replied, dismounting stiffly. "Abe took a bullet in the leg, Micah got one in the side, both alive, but Micah's in a bad way." As the wounded men were transferred to the doctor's care, Katherine could only stand frozen, her eyes fixed on Yates. When he finally dismounted and handed his horse to a waiting stable boy, she found herself moving toward him without conscious thought. He saw her coming and stopped, something vulnerable crossing his exhausted face. "Katherine!" Then she was before him, her hands reaching up to touch his face, assuring herself he was really there, unharmed. "You're all right." His larger hands covered hers, pressing them against his stubbled cheeks. "I'm all right." The intimate gesture, performed in full view of half the town, would normally have mortified Katherine. In that moment, however, she cared for nothing but the solid reality of him standing before her. "Did you catch them?" she asked. A grim satisfaction crossed his face. "We did. 3 men, just as we thought. They'll stand trial in Omaha next month." His expression darkened. "Though not before they put up a fight, Micah might not make it." Katherine glanced toward the doctor's office where the wounded men had been taken. "I'm sorry about your friends. They knew the risks." Yates suddenly seemed to become aware of their surroundings, of the curious glances directed their way. Gently, he lowered her hands from his face, though he kept hold of one. "I need to check on them and then get cleaned up, but after." "Yes," Katherine said simply. "After." He squeezed her hand once before releasing it and walking toward the doctor's office. Katherine watched him go, her heart racing with emotions she could no longer deny. That evening, freshly bathed and dressed in clean clothes, Yates came to the mercantile just as Katherine was closing up. Mr. Peterson had given her permission to use the store's small back room for a private conversation, recognizing the impropriety of entertaining a male caller in her upstairs room. Yates removed his hat as he entered, his damp hair combed neatly. his face clean-shaven. Despite his tidy appearance, the shadows under his eyes spoke of bone-deep weariness. "You should be resting," Katherine said as she led him to the back room where she had prepared coffee and some simple sandwiches. "I will," he promised, "but I needed to see you first." They sat across from each other at the small table, the oil lamp between them casting warm light on their faces. For a moment neither spoke, the silence filled with unspoken words. "How are Mr. Collins and Mr. Foster?" Katherine finally asked. "Abe will recover." "Micah." Yates shook his head. "Doc's not hopeful, but he's fighting," Katherine nodded, pouring coffee for them both. "And you, truly?" Yates accepted the cup with a tired smile. "Nothing a good night's sleep won't cure, though I'd be lying if I said those 3 days didn't feel like 3 weeks. He took a sip before continuing. "I thought about you out there on the trail." The simple admission made Katherine's pulse quicken. "Did you?" "I kept thinking I might not come back, that I might never get the chance to tell you." He set down his cup, his eyes meeting hers with newfound resolve. "Katherine, I know it hasn't been long since your father passed. I know your heart is still healing, but I find myself caring for you in ways I didn't think possible anymore." Katherine's throat tightened with emotion. "Olivia told me about Clara, about what happened." Pain flashed across his face. "I thought I'd never feel anything again after losing her. I built walls around what was left of my heart and convinced myself that was enough." His hand moved across the table, fingers brushing hers. "Then I saw you at that cemetery, and something in me recognized something in you. A kind of kinship in grief." "Is that all it was?" Katherine asked softly. "Recognition?" "At first," he admitted. "But then I came to know you, your strength, your kindness, the way you face each day despite your loss." His fingers curled around hers. "It became something more. Something I wasn't looking for but found anyway." Katherine turned her hand in his, their palms meeting, fingers intertwining. "I wasn't looking either," she whispered. "I was just trying to survive each day, but you made me want to do more than survive." His eyes, deep brown in the lamplight, studied her face. "I'm not asking for promises, Katherine. I know it's too soon. I just wanted you to know how I feel in case there's another posse, another risk," she finished for him. "Is that the life you lead, Yates? Always putting yourself in danger?" He shook his head. "No, the livery is my life now, but in a place like this, sometimes danger finds you whether you're looking for it or not." Katherine understood. The frontier was still wild in many ways, lawlessness a constant threat despite the growing civilization of towns like Council Bluffs. "I was so afraid," she admitted. "When I heard you'd gone after those men, I realized then that I couldn't bear to lose you too." The words hung between them, a confession neither had expected. Yates's grip on her hand tightened. "Katherine." A knock at the store's front door interrupted the moment. Mr. Peterson's voice called through, "Miss Lawson, there's someone here for Mr. Quinn." Reluctantly, they separated, moving to the front of the store where Deputy Reed waited, his expression grim. "Micah's asking for you, Yates," he said without preamble. "Doc says it won't be long." Yates nodded, reaching for his hat. "I'll be right there." Turning to Katherine, he said quietly, "I have to go." "Of course," she replied. "Your friend needs you." He hesitated, clearly torn between duty and desire. "Tomorrow," he promised. "We'll continue this conversation tomorrow," but tomorrow brought new complications. Micah Foster died just before dawn, leaving a wife and 3 young children behind. The town rallied around the grieving family, organizing a funeral and collection to support Mrs. Foster and her children. Katherine threw herself into these efforts, helping Olivia prepare food and gather donations. Yates, as one of Micah's closest friends, shouldered the responsibility of arranging the burial and supporting the widow through her initial shock. Though Katherine caught glimpses of him throughout the day, they had no opportunity for private conversation. The funeral was held the following afternoon, the second Katherine had attended in less than a month. As she stood among the mourners, watching another pine box being lowered into the earth, her own grief resurged with unexpected force. Mrs. Foster's sobs reminded her too vividly of her own. and the three foster children, standing bewildered beside their mother, struck a painful chord. When the service concluded, Katherine found herself unable to join the gathering at the foster home. Instead, she walked to the edge of the cemetery where her father's grave lay, still marked by fresh-turned earth and a simple wooden cross. Kneeling beside it, she traced her fingers over his name. "I miss you, Pa," she whispered. "Every day, but I'm finding my way," her voice caught. "I think I might be falling in love, and I'm scared because I know how easily people can be taken away." Lost in her thoughts, she didn't hear the approaching footsteps until a shadow fell across the grave. Looking up, she found Yates standing there, hat in hand, just as he had that first evening. "I thought I might find you here," he said softly. Katherine wiped away tears she hadn't realized were falling. "The funeral, it brought everything back." Yates nodded in understanding. "Grief has a way of doing that. Just when you think you're healing, something rips the wound open again." He offered his hand, helping her to her feet, but didn't release her fingers once she stood. Instead, he drew her gently away from the grave to a nearby oak tree, its spreading branches offering privacy from the dispersing funeral attendees. "I'm sorry we haven't had a chance to talk," he said. "After the other night." "There's no need to apologize," Katherine assured him. "Your friend needed you." "Yes," Yates agreed, "and now his family needs all of us." He paused, studying her face. "But I haven't forgotten what we were discussing, what you said." Katherine's cheeks warmed at the memory of her confession. "Nor have I." His hand reached up, hesitant, before gently tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "I've been thinking a lot about second chances, Katherine, about how life can take everything from you in an instant, but sometimes it gives something back when you least expect it." "Is that what this is?" she asked softly. "A second chance, for both of us, I hope." His hand lingered near her face, his expression uncertain. "If it's too soon." Katherine caught his hand, pressing it against her cheek. "My heart is still healing," she admitted. "There are days when grief overwhelms me, but you've shown me there can be light even in darkness." His eyes, warm and sincere, held hers. "Then may I court you properly, Katherine Lawson. Not to replace what you've lost, but to build something new alongside it." The question, so formally asked yet filled with genuine feeling, brought fresh tears to her eyes, not of grief this time, but of hope. "Yes," she whispered. "I would like that very much." With exquisite tenderness, Yates leaned forward and pressed his lips to her forehead, a gesture of promise rather than passion. "Thank you," he murmured against her skin. As they walked back toward town side by side, not touching but close enough to feel each other's presence, Katherine felt something shift within her, not an ending to her grief, but the beginning of a path forward that somehow incorporated both sorrow and joy, loss and newfound love. The following weeks brought a new rhythm to Katherine's life. Her days were filled with work at the Mercantile, where she gradually won the respect of even the most demanding customers with her efficiency and quiet charm. Her evenings, however, belonged increasingly to Yates. Their courtship proceeded with careful propriety. Yates would call for her after the store closed, and they would walk together through town, sometimes stopping for supper at the hotel restaurant, other times joining Olivia for a meal at her apartment. On Sundays, they attended church together, their presence as a couple drawing approving nods from some townspeople and curious glances from others. Katherine learned more about Yates's past during these times together. Born in Pennsylvania to a blacksmith father, he had grown up working with horses. When the war between the states erupted, he had enlisted in the Union Army at 18, serving as a cavalryman. After the war, he had returned home, married his childhood sweetheart Clara, and attempted to build a peaceful life. "We had 2 good years together," he told Katherine one evening as they sat on a bench near the town square. "The 3rd year, she told me we were going to have a child. I've never been happier than that moment." Katherine squeezed his hand gently, encouraging him to continue even as she heard the pain beneath his words. "The pregnancy went well until the very end," he said, his voice growing quieter. "The labor was difficult. The doctor tried everything, but I lost them both within hours of each other. My son lived long enough for me to hold him once. Oh, Yates, Katherine whispered, tears filling her eyes at the unimaginable loss. After that, I couldn't stay there. Our home, our town, even the sight of children playing everything was a reminder. He took a deep breath. I headed west with no real destination in mind. Worked as a scout, a ranch hand, even hunted bounties for a while, just moving, always moving until I reached Council Bluffs. What made you stay? Katherine asked. A small smile crossed his face. Olivia, primarily. She'd followed me west a year earlier, worried about my wandering. When I found her settled here, working at the millinery, it felt like a sign. He glanced at her. And your father, of course, his kindness in loaning me the money for the livery when he barely knew me. It restored some of my faith in the goodness of life. Katherine's heart ached for all he had endured, yet she felt privileged that he trusted her enough to share his pain. In turn, she opened up about her own past her childhood on a farm in Ohio, losing her mother to fever when she was 16. The difficult years that followed as she and her father struggled to maintain their land before finally selling and moving west in search of better opportunities. We thought we'd find our fortune, she said with a sad smile. Instead, we found more hardship. The first farm failed and then Pa got sick just as we were beginning to make this one work. Do you regret coming west? Yates asked. Katherine considered the question seriously before answering. No, despite everything, no, there's a freedom here that didn't exist back east, a sense that you can remake yourself start again. She looked at him. And had we stayed in Ohio, I never would have met you. As summer progressed into fall, their relationship deepened. Yates began teaching Katherine to ride, selecting a gentle mare from his stable for her use. These riding lessons, always conducted in full view of the town to preserve Katherine's reputation, became the highlight of her week. There was something exhilarating about the shared activity, about learning a skill that connected her more fully to Yates's world. By October, when the first chill crept into the air and the trees along the Missouri River blazed with autumn color, Katherine realized she had passed several important milestones. She had lived 4 months without her father. She had established herself in a position of respect within the community, and she had fallen irrevocably in love with Yates Quinn. The realization came not in a dramatic moment, but during an ordinary Sunday afternoon as they rode along the river. Yates was pointing out landmarks, telling her stories of the early settlers who had crossed these waters decades earlier. As she watched him, his face animated, his hands gesturing expressively, Katherine felt a certainty settle in her heart. This was the man she wanted to build a life with. This was the future she hadn't dared hope for in those dark days following her father's death. That evening, as they returned to town, Yates seemed unusually thoughtful. When they reached the back entrance to Katherine's room above the mercantile, he helped her dismount with his customary care but kept hold of her hands after her feet touched the ground. Katherine, he began, then hesitated. There's something I need to ask you. Her heart quickened at his serious tone. Yes, he guided her to sit on the small bench beside her door, then surprised her by kneeling before her. I had planned a more elaborate speech, he said with a nervous smile, but now that the moment's here, I find myself thinking that simple truth is best. From his pocket, he withdrew a small velvet box. Katherine Lawson, these past months have brought me a joy I never thought to feel again. You've reminded me what it means to look forward to each new day, to plan for a future rather than just endure the present. He opened the box, revealing a delicate gold ring set with a small but brilliant diamond. Will you marry me? Though she had begun to hope for this moment, the reality of it still stole her breath. Yates, she whispered, her fingers reaching out to touch the ring, it's beautiful. It was my mother's, he explained. Olivia kept it safe for me all these years. Katherine looked from the ring to his face, seeing both hope and vulnerability in his expression. Are you certain? She asked softly. I know how much you loved Clara, understanding filled his eyes. I did love her, and a part of me always will. But loving her doesn't mean I can't love you just as deeply, just as completely. He took her hand. My heart has room for both the memory of what was and the promise of what could be with you. Tears filled Catherine's eyes, but they were tears of happiness. Then yes, she said, her voice steadying with certainty. Yes, I will marry you. The joy that transformed his face was answer enough to any lingering doubts. With reverent care, he slipped the ring onto her finger, then raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss against her knuckles. Rising from his kneeling position, he drew her to her feet and into his arms. Their first kiss was gentle, a tender exploration rather than a passionate claim. Katherine felt herself melting into his embrace, her hands resting on his chest where she could feel the strong, steady beat of his heart. When they finally parted, she kept her eyes closed for a moment, savoring the sweetness of the connection. When? Yates asked, his voice husky. When will you marry me? Katherine opened her eyes, smiling up at him. I think a spring wedding would be lovely. After the winter snows, but before the summer heat, he nodded, his hands still resting lightly at her waist. April then, 5 months to prepare. 5 months to prepare, she echoed, and a lifetime to enjoy. News of their engagement spread quickly through Council Bluffs. Olivia was ecstatic, immediately offering to help with wedding preparations. Mr. Peterson congratulated Katherine warmly and, to her surprise, offered the upstairs room at reduced rent until the wedding, insisting she would need to save for her new life. Most townspeople received the news positively, though Katherine overheard occasional whispered concerns about the speed of the courtship following her father's death. Such talk bothered her initially until Olivia offered her characteristic blunt wisdom. People will always talk, she said when Katherine mentioned it. But those who matter understand that happiness doesn't follow a timetable, especially out here where life can be so unpredictable. As winter descended upon the plains, bringing howling winds and heavy snow, Katherine was grateful for the warmth of community and love that sustained her. The holiday season, which she had dreaded facing without her father, became instead a time of new traditions. She and Yates joined Olivia for Christmas dinner, exchanging modest gifts and sharing stories late into the evening. On New Year's Eve, standing on the boardwalk outside the hotel as the town celebrated the arrival of 1879, Yates wrapped his coat around both of them and kissed her as the church bell tolled midnight. "This year," he whispered against her lips, "this year I make you my wife." Winter gradually gave way to the first tentative signs of spring. Wedding preparations accelerated as the date approached. Olivia and the town's seamstress collaborated on Katherine's dress, a confection of ivory satin with delicate lace trim, far more elegant than she had dared hope for. Yates, meanwhile, worked tirelessly on preparations of a different sort. He had purchased land on the outskirts of town, and with the help of friends was building a modest but sturdy house for them to begin their married life. "It's nothing grand," he cautioned when he first showed Katherine the half-completed structure. "But there's room to expand as needed." Katherine walked through the framed rooms, already envisioning curtains at windows that didn't yet exist, a garden plot in the churned earth outside. "It's perfect," she told him sincerely. "A true home." As April arrived, bringing with it gentle rains and blooming wildflowers, a sense of anticipation filled the air. The house was completed just 2 weeks before the wedding, allowing time for Katherine to arrange their limited furnishings, her mother's quilt on the new bed, Yates's books on shelves he had built himself, wedding gifts from townspeople gradually filling the kitchen. The day before the wedding, Katherine visited her father's grave. The wooden cross had been replaced with a proper headstone, a gift from Yates that had moved her to tears when he first showed it to her. "Hello, Pa," she said, placing fresh wildflowers at the base of the stone. "I'm getting married tomorrow. I wish you could be here to walk me down the aisle." She touched the smooth granite gently. "You would like Yates, I think. He's a good man, steady and kind, the sort of man you always hoped I'd find." A gentle breeze stirred the grass around the grave, and Katherine smiled through her tears. I miss you every day, but I'm happy, Pa, truly happy. I think that's what you would want for me." As she prepared to leave, a familiar figure appeared at the cemetery gate. Yates, waiting respectfully at a distance. When she joined him, he took her hand without comment, understanding her need for this final moment of connection with her past before embracing their future. Their wedding day dawned clear and mild, the April sun warming the earth after an early morning shower that left everything looking washed clean and new. In Olivia's apartment, Katherine dressed with trembling hands, assisted by her soon-to-be sister-in-law. "You look beautiful," Olivia said, securing the last pearl button on Katherine's dress before arranging the simple veil over her golden hair. Absolutely radiant. Katherine studied her reflection in the mirror, hardly recognizing the woman who looked back at her. Grief had changed her, as had love, both transformations visible in the depth of her eyes, the slight curve of her mouth. "I never thought I'd feel this way again," she confessed. "Happy, hopeful." Olivia squeezed her shoulders gently. "That's the greatest gift we can give to those we've lost, to live fully in their absence, to find joy despite our scars." The small church was filled to capacity when Katherine arrived. In the absence of her father, Mr. Peterson had offered to escort her down the aisle, a kindness that touched her deeply. As the first notes of music filled the sanctuary, she took a steadying breath and placed her hand on his arm. "Ready, my dear?" he asked with a grandfatherly smile. "Ready," she replied, her eyes already seeking Yates at the altar. He stood tall and handsome in his best suit, his dark hair neatly trimmed, his face clean-shaven. But it was his expression, as she appeared in the doorway, that Katherine would remember forever, a look of such profound love and wonder that it brought fresh tears to her eyes. The ceremony passed in a blur of emotion. They had chosen traditional vows, finding comfort in the time-honored words that had joined countless couples before them. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Yates's kiss was both tender and promising, a sealing of their commitment before God and community. The celebration afterward was modest but joyful, a meal at the hotel, music and dancing, congratulations from friends and neighbors. As evening approached, they slipped away to their new home, leaving the revelry behind for the privacy of their first night as husband and wife. Standing in the doorway of their house, Yates surprised Katherine by sweeping her into his arms. "Tradition," he explained with a smile as he carried her across the threshold. Inside, lamps had been lit, casting a warm glow over the simple furnishings. A fire crackled in the hearth, taking the chill from the spring evening. Everything was exactly as they had prepared it, yet somehow transformed by their new status as husband and wife. Yates set Katherine gently on her feet but kept his arms around her waist. "Welcome home, Mrs. Quinn." The name, heard for the first time, sent a thrill through her. "It sounds strange yet right," she said, leaning into his embrace. "It will become familiar with time," he assured her, his hand coming up to gently remove the pins from her hair, letting the golden waves fall around her shoulders. "We have all the time in the world now." Their coming together that night was tender and unhurried, a mutual discovery guided by love rather than mere desire. Yates's patience and gentleness eased Katherine's natural nervousness, transforming uncertainty into intimacy and, ultimately, into shared pleasure that left them both breathless and amazed. Afterward, lying in each other's arms as moonlight spilled through the curtainless window, Katherine traced the contours of her husband's face with wondering fingers. "I never imagined such happiness was possible," she whispered. He caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "This is just the beginning," he promised. Life as a married couple required adjustments for both of them. Katherine continued working at the mercantile part-time while learning to manage their household. Yates spent long days at the livery but always returned home for supper, often bringing small surprises: wildflowers gathered along the road, a ribbon from the general store, once a kitten found abandoned near the stable. Their evenings were spent in simple companionship, reading aloud to each other, planning improvements for their home, occasionally entertaining Olivia or other friends. As spring deepened into summer, Katherine planted the garden she had envisioned, coaxing vegetables and flowers from the prairie soil. One warm evening in July, as they sat on their small porch watching the sunset paint the western sky, Yates reached for her hand. "Are you happy, Katherine? Truly?" She looked at him in surprise. "Of course. Why would you ask?" he shrugged, a hint of uncertainty in his expression. "Sometimes I wonder if I rushed you, if you had enough time to grieve before taking on marriage." Katherine leaned against his shoulder, considering her answer carefully. "Grief doesn't work that way, Yates. It's not something you finish and put aside, it becomes part of you." She lifted her face to his. "But so does love. They exist together, neither diminishing the other." He nodded slowly, his arm tightening around her. "You've become quite wise, Mrs. Quinn." "I had good teachers," she replied, thinking of both her father and Yates himself, who had first held her at a graveside and said those simple, powerful words. "Cry as long as you need." As summer faded into autumn, Katherine began to suspect a change in her condition. Her monthly courses, always regular, failed to appear. Certain foods that she had previously enjoyed now turned her stomach. Mornings brought a persistent queasiness that she struggled to hide from Yates's observant eyes. Finally certain, she waited for the perfect moment to share the news. It came on a crisp October evening, almost exactly a year after Yates had proposed. They were preparing for bed, Yates stoking the fire while Katherine brushed her hair at the small vanity he had crafted for her. "Yates," she said, meeting his eyes in the mirror, "I have something to tell you." He set down the poker, turning toward her with a questioning look. "What is it?" Katherine set aside her brush and stood, moving to take his hands in hers. "I'm with child," she said simply. "We're going to have a baby in the spring." For a moment he stood perfectly still, his expression unreadable. Then, to her astonishment, tears filled his eyes. "Katherine," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Are you certain?" She nodded, squeezing his hands. "Dr. Wilson confirmed it yesterday. He says everything appears healthy." Yates pulled her gently into his arms, his face buried in her hair. She could feel him trembling and understood the complex emotions coursing through him, joy for their future mingled with painful memories of his past loss. "I'm scared," he admitted in a voice so low she barely heard it. "I couldn't bear to lose you the way I lost Clara." Katherine drew back enough to look into his face. "I know," she said softly. "I can't promise that nothing will go wrong, but Dr. Wilson says I'm strong and healthy, and medicine has advanced since then." Yates nodded, visibly gathering his courage. Slowly he knelt before her, his hands resting gently on her still flat stomach. "Hello, little one," he whispered. "Your mother and I are very happy you're coming to join us." The months of Katherine's pregnancy passed with a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. Yates hovered protectively, insisting she reduce her hours at the mercantile as her condition advanced. Olivia proved an invaluable support, sharing practical advice and helping prepare the small room adjacent to their bedroom as a nursery. As her body changed, Katherine found herself experiencing a new dimension of grief for her father, wishing he could know about the grandchild he would never meet. On particularly difficult days, Yates would hold her as she cried, never rushing her tears or offering empty platitudes. Winter settled over Council Bluffs with unusual severity that year. Heavy snows isolated the town for weeks at a time, making travel difficult and supplies scarce. Katherine, now visibly pregnant, remained mostly at home, preparing for the baby's arrival by sewing tiny garments and reading everything she could find about childbirth and infant care. Yates worked tirelessly to ensure their comfort, keeping the woodpile stacked high, making improvements to the house to guard against drafts, and bringing home whatever delicacies he could find to tempt Katherine's often finicky appetite. As February turned to March with no break in the cold, Katherine's anxiety grew. Her due date was approaching, but the roads remained nearly impassable. What if the doctor couldn't reach them when the time came? "He'll come," Yates assured her, though she could see his own worry reflected in his eyes. "And if not, Mrs. Peterson has delivered half the babies in town. We won't be alone." The first signs of labor began on a bitterly cold night in early April. Katherine woke to a dull ache in her lower back that gradually intensified into unmistakable contractions. Trying not to panic, she woke Yates, who immediately sprang into action. "I'll fetch Dr. Wilson," he said, already pulling on his clothes. "And Mrs. Peterson." "You just try to rest until we return." Katherine nodded, not trusting her voice as another contraction gripped her. She watched her husband hurry out into the darkness, praying that both he and help would return swiftly. The hours that followed tested Katherine's strength and courage as nothing ever had. Dr. Wilson arrived just as her labor intensified, his calm presence reassuring despite the obvious difficulty of his journey through the snow. Mrs. Peterson bustled about, preparing hot water and clean linens, her experienced hands checking Katherine's progress with gentle efficiency. Yates remained by her side throughout, holding her hand, wiping her brow, murmuring encouragement as she struggled through each contraction. In his eyes, she saw both fear and absolute fear of history repeating itself, faith in her strength to prevail. As dawn broke over the prairie, painting the snow-covered landscape in hues of pink and gold, Katherine gave one final push. The room filled with the indignant wail of a newborn entering the world. "A boy," Dr. Wilson announced, quickly wrapping the tiny, red-faced infant in a warm blanket. "A fine, healthy boy." Exhausted but triumphant, Katherine reached for her son as he was placed in her arms. Through tears of joy, she looked up at Yates, who stood motionless beside the bed, his face a study in wonder and disbelief. "He's here," she whispered. "He's really here." Yates sank to his knees beside the bed, one trembling finger reaching out to touch the baby's cheek. "He's perfect," he breathed. "You're both perfect." They named him Samuel Thomas Quinn Samuel after Katherine's father, Thomas after Yates's. As spring finally arrived in earnest, melting the snow and bringing new life to the prairie, their small family settled into a routine centered around the miraculous new addition to their household. Parenthood brought fresh challenges and unexpected joys. Sleepless nights gave way to mornings spent marveling at Samuel's tiny fingers and the perfect curve of his smile. Katherine discovered reserves of strength she hadn't known she possessed, while Yates revealed a gentle patience with their son that made her love him even more deeply. On a warm day in June, when Samuel was nearly 2 months old, Katherine packed a simple picnic and suggested they ride out to her father's grave. Yates nodded understanding, securing Samuel in a sling across his chest for the journey. At the cemetery, now bright with summer wildflowers, Katherine stood with her son in her arms, Yates at her side. "Pa," she said softly, "I want you to meet your grandson, Samuel. He has your smile already." As a gentle breeze rustled the grass around them, Katherine felt a profound sense of completion. The circle of loss and renewal, grief and joy, had brought her to this moment standing between the man she loved and the father she had lost, holding the future in her arms. Yates placed his arm around her shoulders, drawing her close. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. Katherine looked up at him, seeing in his face everything she had once thought lost: forever love, family, hope. "Yes," she answered truthfully. "For the first time in a very long time, I truly am." As they walked back toward their horses, Samuel sleeping peacefully against his father's chest, Katherine thought of that moment at the cemetery 1.5 years earlier, a broken-hearted young woman kneeling beside a fresh grave, a kind stranger offering comfort with simple words, "Cry as long as you need." She couldn't have known then how those words would mark the beginning rather than the end, how grief would open the door to a love deeper than she had ever imagined possible. Looking at her husband and son, at the life they were building together in this wild, beautiful country, Katherine sent a silent prayer of gratitude heavenward. The journey from heartbreak to healing wasn't finished, perhaps it never would be, but she no longer walked it alone. And in that knowledge, she found peace.